She saw him every day, lurking near her house, pacing the streets like he owned them. A massive stray dog, filthy and wild-eyed. Dangerous, she thought. She had to protect her child. So, she did what any mother would do. She called animal control to take him away. But before they could arrive, her worst nightmare became reality. A fire, her child trapped inside. And before she could scream for help, the stray dog did something that made her world stop. Sometimes, we think we know everything about a situation until we don't. This is the story of a woman who thought she was protecting her family, but ended up learning the hardest, most heart-wrenching lesson of her life. Because that aggressive, stray dog she feared, he wasn't what he seemed. And by the end of the story, neither was she. Lisa had always been careful. Some might call her overprotective, but she didn't care. She was a single mother, raising her 5-year-old son, Max, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where life was supposed to be safe and predictable. She had built a routine, a bubble of security, where nothing unexpected could happen. But lately, something had disturbed that peace. The dog. It had been over a week since she first noticed him, large, ragged, and always lurking. At first, she thought maybe he belonged to someone. He was big, much bigger than any of the pet dogs in the neighborhood. His coat, once a thick golden brown, was now tangled with dirt and grime. His ribs were faintly visible beneath his fur, like he had once been strong but had grown weak with time. And then there were the scars. Lisa had only seen them up close once, long, jagged marks across his muzzle and back, like old wounds that had never fully healed. That alone made her uneasy. A dog that looked like that couldn't be friendly, could he? Lisa had spent years teaching Max the basics of safety. Look both ways before crossing the street. Never talk to strangers. Always stay close in public places. But there was no way to teach a child what to do if a stray dog decided to attack. And that was the problem, because the dog wasn't just passing through. He was staying. Every day, she spotted him somewhere nearby. Some mornings, he'd be at the end of the street, sitting near a storm drain like he had nowhere to go. Other times, he'd wander onto the sidewalk, sniffing at garbage bins, looking for scraps. But what unsettled her most was when she saw him near her house. One evening, Lisa had been taking out the trash when she caught movement from the corner of her eye. She turned and there he was, standing just beyond the fence in her backyard, his massive frame still, his eyes fixed on her. She froze. He didn't growl. He didn't move. He just stared. Lisa felt her pulse quicken. What did he want? She clutched the trash bag tighter, slowly backing toward the door. The dog remained motionless, his head tilting slightly, as if studying her. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away, vanishing into the night. Lisa slammed the door shut, locking it instinctively. The next morning, she saw paw prints in the dirt just outside her fence. That was the moment she knew this wasn't just a stray passing through. He was watching, and she didn't know why. At first, Lisa tried to dismiss it. Maybe she was being paranoid. But when she brought it up with her neighbors, they didn't seem concerned. Oh, that old dog. Mrs. Callahan, the elderly woman next door, waved a hand dismissively. He's been around for a while. Harmless thing. Harmless? Lisa struggled to believe that. He doesn't belong to anyone, she asked. Not that I know of, Mrs. Callahan said. Some people leave food out for him. Poor guy's probably just looking for a place to rest. Lisa pressed her lips together. Maybe that was true. Maybe he wasn't a threat. But she couldn't take that chance. Not with Max. She had heard too many stories. Dogs snapping without warning, attacking out of nowhere. Just last year, she had read about a stray that had bitten a child in a nearby town. It had been unprovoked, the parents had said. The dog had seemed normal until it wasn't. And this one was too big, too strong. Lisa knew that if he ever decided to lunge at Max, there would be nothing she could do to stop him. She had to act. That morning, Lisa sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. She hesitated. Was she overreacting? She glanced toward the window. The backyard was quiet, the morning sun stretching long shadows across the grass. But the unease wouldn't leave her. She picked up the phone and dialed. Animal control, a woman's voice answered. How can I help you? Lisa swallowed. Hi. I need to report a stray dog in my neighborhood. He's been hanging around for over a week now. What's the issue with the animal? The woman asked. Lisa hesitated again. What was the issue? He hadn't actually done anything. He's big, looks aggressive, she said quickly. I have a young child, and I don't feel safe with him around. Has the dog shown any signs of aggression? Lisa's mind flashed back to the way he had stared at her through the fence. No, but I don't want to wait until he does, she said firmly. There was a pause. Then the woman replied, all right, We can send someone out this afternoon to assess the situation." Lisa exhaled, relieved. "Thank you." As she hung up, she looked out the window again. The backyard was still empty. For the first time in days, she felt like she was regaining control. By the afternoon, the stray would be gone. Lisa tried to push the dog from her mind. She made Max his favorite peanut butter and banana sandwich, answered a few emails for work, and even let herself relax with a cup of coffee. Everything was normal again. And then Max spoke. "Mommy, I saw the doggy again," he said, swinging his legs under the table. Lisa's grip tightened on her coffee mug. "Where?" "In the yard." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. "When?" "Just now," Max said. He took a bite of his sandwich, unfazed. "I was looking out the window, and he was there." He looked at me. Lisa shot up from her chair, heart pounding. She stormed to the window, pulling the curtains aside. Nothing. The backyard was empty. She let out a shaky breath. "He's gone now, honey," she said, forcing a smile. "But if you ever see him again, don't go near him, okay?" Max nodded, chewing happily. "He doesn't look mean, though. He looks sad." Lisa's stomach twisted. Sad. She turned back to the window. Still empty. She checked the time. Just afternoon. Animal control would be here in a couple of hours. She just had to wait. And then, everything would go back to normal. She had no idea how wrong she was. The fire started just 2 hours later. Lisa would never forget the sound of the smoke alarm piercing through the house. The way her heart had dropped as she smelled the smoke. One moment, she was sitting at her desk, finishing up some work. The next, she was running for the stairs, screaming Max's name. The flames were already spreading, swallowing the kitchen, creeping up the walls. The heat was unbearable. And then she realized Max was still upstairs. Trapped, Lisa ran for the stairs, but the fire had spread too fast. The smoke was too thick. She couldn't reach him. And then she heard it, a deep, guttural bark. Her head snapped toward the front yard. The stray. He stood there, ears back, eyes locked on the burning house. And before Lisa could react, he bolted, straight into the fire. Lisa could barely think. Her ears rang with the sharp wail of sirens that weren't there yet, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. The thick black smoke billowed from the windows, curling into the sky like a monstrous claw. The fire spread fast, too fast. One moment, it was just a flicker in the kitchen, maybe a faulty wire, maybe something left too close to the stove. She didn't know. It didn't matter, because now her house was burning, and Max was inside. Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears as she stumbled back from the heat. "Max!" she screamed, her throat raw. "Baby, Mommy's here." A small, terrified voice answered from the second floor. "Mommy, I can't get out." Her stomach dropped. She tried to run forward, to get back inside, but the flames lashed out, a fiery barrier between her and the staircase. The air inside was thick, suffocating. The heat pressed against her skin, making every step unbearable. She choked, stumbled back outside, and grabbed her phone with shaking fingers. 911. The operator's voice was calm. 911. What's your emergency? Lisa could barely get the words out. My house is on fire. My son, he's still inside. I can't get to him. Please, please hurry. Stay on the line, ma'am. Firefighters are on their way. Do not attempt to go back inside. Lisa barely heard her. Do not go back inside. Her baby was in there, trapped, and she was standing outside, helpless. She turned frantically, looking for help, for anyone, but the street was empty. Where were the neighbors? The people who always seemed to be outside? Where were the sirens? Lisa felt like she was drowning in slow motion. The fire roared, a living beast consuming everything she owned. And above it all, Max's cries pierced through the chaos. Then movement. Lisa turned just in time to see a blur of first sprint past her. The stray. He was there, watching. Lisa barely had time to process it. 1 second, the dog stood still, his body tense, his dark eyes locked onto the house. The next, he ran, straight into the fire. Lisa's scream ripped through her throat. No, stop. But he didn't stop. His massive paws pounded against the ground, his muscles coiled like springs. He charged toward the front door, past the flames licking at the doorway, disappearing into the inferno. Lisa's breath hitched. The heat was unbearable from where she stood, but he had run straight through it. Her mind couldn't keep up. She had spent weeks fearing this dog, calling him dangerous, treating him like a threat. Now, he was risking his life for her son. She could hear the fire roaring, wood splitting and crackling as the house groaned under the pressure. The heat shimmered off the pavement, distorting her vision. The seconds stretched on. What was he doing in there? Had he made it to Max? She couldn't see through the thick smoke, couldn't hear anything over the roaring flames. And then a sound, barking, loud, sharp, urgent. Lisa's heart leapt. It was him. Inside, the world was burning. The heat was overwhelming, thick smoke curling through the air, swallowing everything in darkness. But the stray didn't hesitate. He had heard the little one crying. He followed the sound, paws hitting the scorched floor. He weaved through the collapsing furniture, flames licking at his fur. The smell of smoke burned his nose, but he pushed forward, and then he saw him. The boy was curled in the corner of his room, arms wrapped around his stuffed animal, his small face streaked with tears. The dog stopped, ears perking. Max saw him, blinking through the haze. "Doggy." His voice was small, weak. The stray stepped closer, crouching low, trying to show he wasn't a threat. He barked once, short, commanding, "Come." Max hesitated, coughing as the smoke thickened. His little lungs were struggling, but then he moved, crawling on shaky limbs. He reached for the dog, and the moment he was close enough, the stray acted. He grabbed the back of Max's pajama, shirt gently between his teeth, and lifted him. The boy gasped but didn't fight it. He held onto the dog's thick fur, his little hands gripping desperately. The dog turned and ran. Lisa was screaming. She could hear the fire trucks now, the distant wail of sirens cutting through the chaos, but they were still too far. And then movement. A shadow emerged from the smoke. The stray. Lisa's heart stopped. And then she saw Max, dangling from the dog's mouth, alive. The dog charged through the flames and into the open air, Max clinging to his fur. The moment they were out, Lisa ran. She barely registered the heat still licking at the house, barely felt the rough pavement scraping her knees as she collapsed in front of them. She grabbed Max, pulling him from the dog's grasp, cradling him against her chest. He was crying, coughing, but he was breathing. "Oh my God," she sobbed, rocking him back and forth. "Baby, baby, I've got you." She turned to the dog, her savior. His fur was singed, his body covered in soot. He panted heavily, his sides heaving, but his eyes never left Max. Lisa's breath hitched. He had done it. He had saved her son. The fire trucks screeched to a stop, firefighters rushing out, hoses unraveling, orders being shouted. Lisa barely noticed. She was still kneeling in the middle of the yard, holding Max close, her eyes locked onto the stray. He was still watching them. And then he turned. Before Lisa could react, he began walking away, his legs shaky, his body exhausted. "Wait!" The word tore from her lips before she could stop it. The dog paused. Lisa's heart pounded. She had spent weeks fearing this animal, and in the end, he was the one who had saved everything she loved. She didn't know why he had done it. She didn't know where he had come from, or what his story was. But she knew one thing. She wasn't letting him walk away. Not after this. Not ever. The dog had vanished into the fire. Lisa's mind refused to accept it. Her knees buckled, her fingers digging into the damp grass beneath her. The thick, acrid smoke swirled in the air, stinging her eyes and burning her throat. The heat was suffocating, but nothing compared to the agony tearing through her chest. Max, her baby, trapped inside, and the dog, that stray she had called dangerous, had run in after him. Lisa's breath hitched. She searched the flames, begging the universe for a miracle. Every second felt stretched, agonizingly slow, as if time itself was mocking her. The flames devoured her home, cracking and splintering the wooden beams, sending embers soaring into the night sky. She could hear the fire trucks now, sirens piercing through the chaos, but they weren't here yet. They weren't going to make it in time. Her pulse pounded, each beat slamming against her ribs. The fire roared louder, drowning out the world, growing, consuming. Then movement. Lisa's heart stopped. She squinted through the smoke, her vision blurred with tears. Something was there, a flicker of movement in the second-story window. And then, a small hand pressed against the glass. Lisa gasped. Max, a race against time. Her son's face appeared, pale and tear-streaked, framed by the thick black smoke curling around him. He coughed violently, pressing his forehead against the glass, his tiny hands weakly pushing at the window that wouldn't open. Lisa's entire body went cold, and then a shadow moved behind him. The stray. Lisa barely had time to process it. The dog was with him. Through the haze of fire and smoke, she could see the massive, soot-covered figure standing behind Max. His fur was scorched, his ears pressed flat against his skull, but his eyes were locked onto hers. He had found Max. He was keeping him safe, but they were still trapped. Lisa turned frantically, waving her arms, screaming for help. "The window! He's at the window!" The firefighters had just pulled up, leaping from their trucks, unraveling hoses, shouting orders. A ladder was being lifted, but it was too slow. Lisa's heart pounded wildly. They didn't have time. And then the dog moved. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as the dog did something that defied all logic, all expectation. He backed up, his body tensed, his muscles coiled like springs. And then he leapt, straight through the window. Glass exploded outward. Shards rained down, glinting like diamonds against the backdrop of fire. And in that split second, Lisa saw it. The dog, with Max clutched in his jaws, holding onto the back of his pajama shirt. The two of them free-falling. Lisa screamed. The firefighters shouted. And then impact. They hit the ground with a heavy thud, rolling across the grass. Lisa's heart stopped. Smoke still swirled around them. Sparks drifted through the air. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Max coughed. Lisa's breath came out in a sob. She ran. Her legs barely worked as she scrambled forward, falling to her knees beside her son. Her hands shook as she scooped him into her arms, feeling the warmth of his small body, feeling his chest rise and fall as he gasped for air. He was alive. He was alive. Oh my God, she sobbed, clutching him to her chest. Baby, baby, I've got you. I've got you. Max whimpered, curling against her. And then, with the innocence only a child could have after such a nightmare, he whispered, Mommy doggy saved me. Lisa froze. She turned and saw him. The stray lay on his side, his massive body heaving with each breath. His fur was singed, his paws scraped raw, his face was covered in soot, but his eyes were still watching Max. He had done it. Lisa's chest ached. This dog she had feared, had tried to have removed, had just risked everything. For her son, for a child that wasn't even his own. And then he moved. Weakly, painfully, he pushed himself up. His legs trembled, his paws unsteady. And then, before Lisa could react, he turned and started limping away. Lisa's breath caught. Wait! Her voice cracked. The dog hesitated. For the first time, she really looked at him. Not as a threat, not as a stray, but as something else. As a hero. Tears blurred her vision as she slowly reached out, her fingers shaking. Please, she whispered. Please don't go. The dog paused. Lisa's heart pounded in the silence. And then he turned back, step by step. He walked toward her. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Lisa felt something in her heart shift, something permanent. This wasn't just a stray. This wasn't just some dangerous animal. This was family. She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the warmth of his fur, the strength beneath the exhaustion. And for the first time, he let her. That day changed everything. Lisa knew at the moment. She looked into the dog's eyes. This wasn't a stray. This wasn't a threat. This was a protector. A soul who had given everything to save her son, despite having no reason to trust humans. The fire raged on for another hour before the firefighters finally tamed the last of the flames. Lisa's house, her home, was gone. Charred wood, ash-covered furniture, the remains of years of memories, photographs, toys, all of it, reduced to nothing. She should have been devastated, and she was. But nothing mattered more than the fact that Max was alive, and so was the dog. As the fire department worked, Lisa sat in the grass, holding Max in her arms, pressing kisses into his soot-covered hair, whispering over and over, "You're safe, you're safe." Max clung to her, exhausted but calm, because he knew something, deep down, without a doubt. He had been saved by a friend. The firefighters noticed the dog, lying nearby, barely moving. "He needs a vet," one of them said. "He took some serious damage." Lisa nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I'll take him." She didn't hesitate, because something had shifted inside her. Fear had been replaced with something else. Gratitude, love, understanding. This dog, this animal she had misjudged so completely, had risked his life without a second thought. She wasn't about to let him suffer alone. Lisa didn't even remember the drive to the veterinary clinic. It was a blur of flashing lights, the smell of smoke clinging to her clothes. Max sitting beside her in the back seat, his tiny hand resting gently on the dog's burnt fur. He didn't say much, but when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Mommy, will he be okay?" Lisa swallowed the lump in her throat. "I don't know, baby," she admitted, "but we're gonna try." Max nodded, his little fingers brushing lightly over the dog's paw. "I want to call him Ash." Lisa blinked. "What? Because of the fire?" Max said, "Because he's strong, and because he didn't leave me." Lisa's heart twisted. It was perfect. Ash, a name that held the weight of what he had done. At the vet, Lisa barely let go of Ash's side as the doctors worked. He has burns, some lung irritation from the smoke, and deep scratches on his paws, the vet explained. But he's strong. He's going to make it. Lisa exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She sat beside Ash in the recovery room, her fingers gently stroking his fur. "I was wrong about you," she whispered. Ash didn't move much, just let out a slow, exhausted sigh. Lisa felt something break inside her. How long had this dog been alone? How many times had people looked at him, just like she had, and assumed the worst? How many people had turned their backs on him, when all he had ever wanted was to belong? Lisa had lost her house, but she hadn't lost everything. She still had Max. She still had the chance to rebuild. And now she had Ash. When the vet finally cleared him to leave, Lisa didn't take him to a shelter. She didn't call animal control. She brought him home. The neighbors were shocked. They had heard about the fire. They had seen the destruction. And they had heard the story, how the dangerous stray had done the unthinkable, how he had run into the flames, risked everything, and saved Max. Lisa saw it in their eyes, the guilt, because they had judged him too. A few of them even admitted it. "I thought he was just some mangy mutt," one man said, shaking his head. "I never imagined." Lisa understood that feeling all too well, because she had been the same. She had called him a danger. She had wanted him gone. But now he was curled up beside Max in their temporary rental house, his head resting on the little boy's lap, as if he had belonged there all along. Ash wasn't just a pet. He wasn't just a stray anymore. He was family. Lisa learned something that day, something that would stay with her forever. People fear what they don't understand, but sometimes the things we fear most are the things we need the most. If this story moved you, subscribe for more heartwarming pet stories.